But we turn our attention, though, to France, because Marine Le Pen's national rally will not win a majority of seats in next Sunday's parliamentary runoff election, according to a poll on Wednesday, suggesting that efforts by the mainstream parties to block the far right might just work. And this is the strange system that works there. But I think we need to find out a little bit more how their system works, what it means, what could happen. Peter Conradi is the Europe editor for the Sunday Times. He joins me now. Peter, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, James.
Whenever I look at the French voting system, I always think it's a little bit bonkers, but it does sort of allow a little bit for buyer's remorse. So it's not just a one-off. Perhaps you could explain how it works so that then we can put any conversation that we have into context.
Yeah, good idea. Well, I mean, the first thing is that this time around, the French election campaign has been blissfully short. The French have only had to endure 3 weeks of it, so about half the length of the British campaign. But as you say, it's complicated because it happens in 2 stages. So essentially what you have the first stage, which we had last Sunday. There are 577 constituencies in France, and you have basically a British-style first-past-the-post contest in each of those seats. Yeah, so far so simple. However, it doesn't stop there. It's not the person that gets the most seats, that gets the most votes who gets elected. What then happens is that you have a second round, which is coming up this Sunday, in which, in most cases, the top 2 from the first round go forward and have a runoff between them. However, and this is where things do get a bit complicated, under certain circumstances where you have a particularly high turnout and where the third candidate has actually done quite well, you get, in theory, this time round, we had 300 constituencies where you would get 3 candidates standing in the runoff, and in fact, a few where you get 4. Now, final twist before we get to the meat of this, and that is that in some cases, in a lot of cases, candidates will withdraw even though they have qualified for the second round because they're really determined to keep one of the other candidates out. Real sort of classic tactical voting. So what has happened this time round is that the other parties are so determined to keep out the National Rally, the former National Front Party of Marine Le Pen, that in about 200 cases, the person that came third has withdrawn to give their own, or sort of a non-National Rally candidate, a straight fight against the National Rally candidate. Right? Confused?
No, I'm not confused at all. I'm just wondering whether, given that we have, I suppose, that first past the post system and this sort of French system, there are always sort of flaws in that. But I suppose very often what happens in the French system is that the French, rather like their sort of protests, they're sort of very sort of vocal and, not necessarily violent, but, they're sort of, they're very sort of vocal in all sorts of different ways. And then, they have a chance to consider, or people sort of gang up, if you like, and they see the result of that first vote. They sort of just step back from the precipice. And then, as you say, perhaps a bit of sort of like, mediocrity sort of comes into play. Does that mean then that, put it this way, was France shocked by that first result that now means that this second round is likely to be less dramatic?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, there's an old saying here that in the first round of an election, you vote with your heart, and in the second round of the election, you vote with your head. You realize that come the second round, it's really serious. Now, the first round was dramatic because the National Rally, the far right party, and I think we really still call it that, got 33% of the vote. It won. So a large section of particularly Paris, other big cities which tend to be more centrist, more left-leaning, were genuinely very, very shocked indeed. The political establishment was very shocked, but there were a lot of people, i.e. those 33% who voted for the National Rally, who weren't shocked at all. They were saying, finally, we have won an election. And who are those people? They're basically people who live in the countryside, who live in smaller towns, who tend to be statistically less well-educated, less outward-looking. A lot of people draw parallels between what's been going on in France and what happened in Britain with the Brexit vote. We probably don't want to reopen that now, but the same kind of divide in the country. So it's a very, very polarized place. And I mean, goodness me, whatever the result this Sunday, there were going to be fireworks, possibly literally fireworks, on the evening when the first exit polls come through.
Well, there could very well be. Now, talk to me about Bardella, because here is we know the name Le Pen, perhaps more moderate than her father, but Marine Le Pen, very popular, very well known. She's been at this game for a long time. Bardella has come along. He's in his late 20s, and seems to be a bit of a sort of pin up for the right.
He is an extraordinary character. He's only 28. He could, come Sunday, become French Prime Minister. He's already the president of the National Rally Party. Marine sort of a step back from that. She still kind of controls the party, but he's the formal head of it. And I mean, he's been the president for several years. He actually led the party's campaign for the European Parliament, not just this time, but 5 years ago. I mean, extraordinary young. I mean, he is a very, very deft political operator, a little bit robotic, but he kind of embodies the kind of respectable face of the National Rally. He goes down particularly well with female voters. He's been described as, every woman's favorite son-in-law. He's a great vote winner for Marine Le Pen.
And when it comes to understanding what this means perhaps for Europe, what it means for the UK, I'm assuming that if the far right or if the National Rally were to get into power, then you have a Eurosceptic kind of stance, and that kind of upends the power play in Europe to an extent that you have at the moment, currently, France and Germany, who are the mainstay, not only financially, but also perhaps politically. And if you have one part of that sort of like double act, if you like, almost sceptical against the EU, against the institution, we could see a ripping up of, I suppose, the Europe that we got to know over the last generation or two.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an extraordinary situation if the National Rally does win and if Bardella does become Prime Minister, because the way the French system works, there's going to be from the beginning potential conflict between him and the President Macron, centrist, who will stay as president for the next 3 years. But a lot of European policy is the competence of the government rather than of the president, because there's kind of a division of powers there. And a lot of what the National Rally wants goes completely against the way the EU works. A lot of things that they're no longer talking about as they were in the past, leaving the EU or leaving the euro, but they disagree with a lot of EU policies. They want a lot more what they call national preference, a whole number of things which are just completely unreconcilable with EU membership, which is going to lead to a big battle in Brussels.
How toxic is the subject of immigration in France?
It is very toxic indeed. It's played as big a part in French politics as it has in British politics, I think. France, obviously, being on the European continent, has even less means of controlling immigration across its borders than Britain does. It's always been an issue for the rally, even since the days of Jean-Marie Le Pen 20, 30 years ago. And it's continued, one can go, as I've done, across the country to areas that don't have much immigration at all, talk to people who say they're going to vote for the National Rally, and you say why, and they say there's too much immigration.
And when it comes to France's standing elsewhere, is there a concern that the French economy has languished? Is there a concern that the French economy is simply not firing on all cylinders enough? And this is perhaps what's firing, certainly, the performance to date of the National Rally.
It's a rather mixed picture, because President Macron, who's been president for the last 7 years, has been a very, very business-friendly president. There's been an awful lot of foreign investment pouring into France, an awful lot of banks that have left Britain, left London in particular, and have moved to Paris. So on one level, the economy seems to be doing well. On the other hand, he's run up an awful lot of debt. The French national debt is enormous, far, far greater than the British one. And there's also just this broad perception that things are that the people people feel that they're suffering. There's an awful lot of discussion about the cost of living crisis that began with the inflation, rising energy bills, and so on. Even though, in fact, energy bills haven't gone up nearly as far in France as they did in Britain, it's still a big issue. And this what the French call the pouvoir d'achat, the purchasing power, that again has been, alongside immigration and law and order, has been one of the sort of the three central planks of the National Rally's appeal.
Well, it certainly has been, and I certainly guess we'll see. So when will we know the result?
Well, the exit polls will come out at 8 o'clock French time, 7 o'clock British time on Sunday evening. So it'll be pretty quick. And as I say, if the National Rally does win, I'm expecting a few hundred yards away from where I am in Paris, there are going to be big demonstrations, and it could turn quite nasty. And there are a number of police will be standing by.
Well, I'm sure we'll be standing by and keeping our eyes and ears open as to what happens there. Peter Conradi, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Peter is the Europe editor for the Sunday Times, and I'm sure you'll be able to read his work there.